But we've seen an increase in generation unit retirements that have increased the risk that not enough resources will be available to serve our peak demand across the footprint and all those time horizons going out in the future. Since 2013, I wanted to mention, so most of the retirements have been your smaller or older coal facilities. I think since 2013, we calculated that there's been in Michigan about 25 coal plants have announced that they're going to retire. And that's equating to about 2,200 megawatts of resource in Michigan alone. As a result of some of these retirements, not just in Michigan, but across our footprint, we're looking at dropping below the planning reserve margin requirement by around the 2020 time period, as illustrated by the chart you see here. So if you think of our reserve margin requirement being around 15%, you can see that we're starting to drop below that amount going forward in time. And so what we also see is as the resources are retiring, we don't see a one-for-one replacement that's occurring. So even though we have some generation that is in our generation interconnection queue, so if a new resource wants to participate in our market, they have to go through our generation interconnection queue to get interconnected to the system, basically. And so we're seeing folks enter that interconnection queue or building plants, but we don't see the one-for-one that that would maintain these higher reserve margins. So this slide provides the results of the survey. I know it's sort of an eye chart, and I apologize for that. We wanted to show you two different time periods associated with that, the survey results. And as you can see, and as evidence of the auction I'm going to talk a little bit about that happened this year, what we're seeing is in the near term, MISO had sufficient resources to meet its regional resource requirement. So we had some regional, one of the advantages of having such a large footprint is we have a diversity of resources. So we have a lot of resources that might be in other places that can serve the load. So we've had some regional resources, surpluses that could provide if you had a zonal deficit. So if you were deficit in one zone, you might be able to use resources in another zone to be able to do that. But looking into the future, that deficit, that surplus generation that we saw is actually becoming a little more scarce. So you can see in 2020, the red 2.3 bar on the left is what I want you to focus on. That is for the footprint itself. And so that is the deficit, 2.3 gigawatts, so 2,300 megawatts is sort of what we're seeing as a deficit that could occur across the entire MISO footprint. So as we look into the future, we think additional actions are needed to ensure sufficient resources beyond that 2019 timeframe. So one of the things that has validated the survey that we performed was our latest resource planning auction. So we run this auction, as I mentioned, every year, and we just ran an auction in March, and the results of which, or in April, and the results of which came out in April. And you might have heard that our price for that auction has gone up significantly. So last year's auction was, I think, around $3.50 a megawatt day. This year, it is actually $72. And what we're seeing is it confirmed that really tightening cost supply, competitive supply curve that you're seeing, and an increasingly steep supply curve. So you're going to see larger price differentials with relatively small changes in capacity as you move up that curve. One of the things that I think is important to point out is that the curve was so steep this year that we were only a couple, I think less than 50 megawatts or around 50 megawatts away from the next price point, and that next price point was around $110. One of the other things I wanted to mention is specifically, I've been talking about a region, but for Michigan, the auction results showed that in Zone 7, which is the lower part of Michigan, we have a requirement to meet the local clearing requirement first. I mentioned that we have these zonal local requirements, and you have to meet those requirements before you can import from other zones. And that was the FERC's decision that we put those in place. And the auction showed that in Zone 7, you were about 1 to 2 power plants, around 750 megawatts away from meeting your local clearing requirement. So if you had that much of a retirement going forward, you would have been close to not meeting that local clearing requirement. So you were pretty close.